Welcome to the video for Chapter 16 of the Cambridge Introduction to Sanskrit, which is going to tell you about vowel sandhi and is going to compare internal and external sandhi. The rules for external vowel sandhi can be summed up as follows. A vowel at the end of a word interacts and often merges with the following vowel, but remains the same when a consonant follows. Let's look at this rule step by step. And let's begin by looking at identical vowels meeting, then a or a encountering a different vowel, then the other simple vowels, namely i, u, or encountering a different vowel, and finally complex vowels. First, identical vowels meeting. When two identical vowels meet, and it doesn't matter whether they are long or short, they merge into one long vowel. And therefore, any combination of a or a plus a or a gives us long a. And the exact same thing happens with long I, long u, and long vocalic Two examples. Sena agacchati, the army is coming, changes into sena gacchati, with the a and a merging into one long a. And note that once these two vowels have merged, the two words are then also written together. Second example, Kanya gacchati iti vadati. The girl is going, Kanya gacchati iti vadati, he says, changes into Kanya gacchati iti vadati, with the I at the end of gacchati and the I at the beginning of iti merging into one long vowel, and the two words then being written together as gacchati iti. Second, a or a encountering a different vowel. Now this is a little more complicated because if you remember, I, au, au in Sanskrit changed into e, I, o, au. And so for example, a or a plus I or I, which would add up to I, appear as e. And so for example, we get Sena tatra iti vadati, which means he says, Sena tatra, there is the army. And we have tatra plus iti, the a plus the I, merging into an e, and then the two words as a result are written together. So from Sena tatra iti vadati, we get Sena tatreti vadati. A or a plus e or I gives us I, and this I surfaces in Sanskrit, or appears as in Sanskrit as I. And so, for example, Sena evam jita, the army was thus defeated, gives us Sena plus evam, a plus e gives us I, and once the two vowels have merged into one vowel, the two words, once the two vowels have merged into one vowel, the two words are also written together. So we have Senaivan jita. Then a or a plus u or u gives us au, which appears as o. And so we have Sena ugra bhavati, the army is fierce, changing into a plus u, giving us o, and then two words merging, Seno gra bhavati. Finally, a or a plus o or au gives us au, and au appears as au. And so we get, for example, narasya ojach, the man's strength, changing into narasyaujach, with the a and o changing or merging into au, and the two words therefore being written together. Narasyaujach. Up next, any simple vowel other than a or a encountering a different vowel. Now, when we have a word that ends in ii, uu, or and this encounters another word that begins with a different vowel, then these original final vowels will change into y, w, and r respectively. Remember, y, w, and r are simply the semivowel or glide equivalents of the vowels ii, uu, or And therefore, once sandhi has occurred, the first word that originally ended in a vowel now ends in a consonant. And when you have a word that ends in a consonant, in Sanskrit writing that is indicated by means of a virama, and Sanskrit doesn't like using viramas unless that's absolutely necessary, and so this first word is combined in writing with whatever word follows. For example, iti uktva, having spoken thus, has the I changing into a y, and then being linked in writing with the next word, giving us ityuktva. Gacchatu atra, meaning let him come here, may he come here, has the u changing into a w in front of the a, and so we get gacchatvatra. Again, the two are written together. And actually, final a or final long a doesn't occur, and so you can't get any examples for that. Finally, complex vowels at the end of a word. If you remember, the complex vowels e, I, o, au originally were I, au, and au. We're actually going to look at the last one first because this behaves differently from the others here. Now, au originally was au, and when this is followed by any other vowel, then the u at the end of that changes into a w, changes into its semi-vowel / glide equivalent. And so therefore, when the word ends in a w, it ends in a consonant, and that would require using a virama. Sanskrit doesn't want to use viramas, and therefore this word is combined in writing with the next word. So for example, narau agacchatam, which means the two men came, changes into narab agacchatam, and that is then combined into writing as narab agacchatam. That's au. The other three complex vowels, on the other hand, namely e, I, and o, all lose their original second element. Remember, e, I, and o originally were I, and au, and so they just lose the I or the u, and e, which is original I, becomes a, I, which is original I, becomes a, and o, which is original au, also becomes a. Note that after this sandhi, we do not find the words combined in writing or combined in any way whatsoever. So, for example, kanye agaccha, meaning girl come, becomes kanya agaccha. Palam kanyayai adarshayat becomes palam kanyaya adarshayat. He showed the fruit to the girl. And guru agaccha, teacher come, becomes gura agaccha. There is one exception to the rule concerning sandhi of final complex vowels, and that is if we have an e or an o at the end of a word and an a short a, at the beginning of the next word. What happens is that the e or the o remain the same, and the a is dropped in pronunciation, but still represented in writing by means of the avagraha symbol, which in Devanagari looks basically like a capital S, and in transliteration usually is represented by an apostrophe. So grame awasat, she lived in the village, would become grame wasat. And you can here also see what that would look like in Devanagari. And finally, sandhi of final vowel plus initial consonant. When we have that combination, a word ending in a vowel and the next word beginning with a consonant, absolutely nothing happens. So, for example, kanya hasati remains just kanya hasati, the girl laughs. I felt that such good news after all these little different changes, thanks to all the different possible sandhi combinations, deserved the use of a silly font, but please feel very free to disagree with me. All the different little details concerning vowel sandhi can be summed up in the table that you see here. Just as with the sandhi of final consonants or final visarga, I recommend that you either print out this table from the website at cambridge-sanskrit.org, or you photocopy it from the book. It's in chapter 16 and also in the reference grammar, and that you use this table as a bookmark and have it handy whenever you use your textbook. And whenever you've got a question about vowel sandhi, you simply check in the table. And the more frequently that you check the table, the more easily you will be able to remember all the little different details contained in it. You'll be pleased to hear that you've now been introduced to all external sandhi. And given that we've already also seen a lot of internal sandhi, let's just briefly compare the two. Both function according to the same basic principles, both achieve easier pronunciation of words and sentences. External sandhi is what we find between independent words, whereas internal sandhi happens within words, for example when a suffix or an ending is added. External sandhi is covered in this book in chapters 11, 13 and 16, whereas internal sandhi is a little more spread out. You get the retroflexion of N in chapter 6, sandhi before T and especially Buddha sandhi in chapter 8, the rookie rule concerning the retroflexion of S in chapter 9, and sandhi before S, as you'll see, in chapter 21. Also, the reference grammar at the back of the book sums up all relevant internal sandhi in one place. The main difference between external and internal sandhi comes in vowel sandhi, and there specifically in the treatment of E, O and I standing before another vowel. What we get internally is E, O and I appearing as I, Av and I. So what's happening here is that E, O, I originally have underlying I, Au and I, and in front of another vowel, the second element of these turns into its semi-vowel equivalent, i.e. y or w, and therefore we get ay, aw or ay. Whereas in external sandhi, we have e, o and I changing into a and a. So what's happening here is that the second element of their underlying form, e has underlying I, O has underlying Au, and I has underlying I. The second element of that is dropped, and therefore I appears as A, Au appears as A, and I appears as A. Also, we have the exception of E and O before short A, where they both just remain as they are. That was it for this chapter. We hope that you found this video helpful, and if you have any comments or suggestions, we would love to hear from you. Please do write to us at rupal@cambridge-sanskrit.org. And now, for your own work on this material, good luck and have fun!